When taken early, they can prove highly effective at preventing progression to serious disease and improving time to recovery, and there is much less hesitancy to take antivirals than vaccines, meaning anti-vaxxers and the vaccine hesitant who are at high risk of serious COVID can also benefit from emerging antivirals like molnupiravir and Paxlovid. Go watch my other video on molnupiravir after this video. Today, I'm exploring Pfizer's drug, Paxlovid. At present, there are already 2 oral drugs approved for the early management of COVID, which are Paxlovid and molnupiravir. In December 2021, the US FDA gave emergency use authorization to Paxlovid, and more countries around the world are following suit. Paxlovid is an antiviral drug that can prevent the replication of the virus and thus prevent infection progression. Paxlovid, unlike molnupiravir, is actually a combination drug. It contains a new experimental molecule, recently named nirmatrelvir, and a well-known antiretroviral drug called ritonavir. Therefore, Paxlovid is more like a drug kit, combining nirmatrelvir and ritonavir. More on why this is later. It's recommended for treating COVID in adults who don't yet require supplemental oxygen, but who are at an increased risk of progression to severe disease. It should be taken immediately after the identification of COVID-19 and taken for 5 days. How does Paxlovid work? Let's look at the components that together form Paxlovid, nirmatrelvir and ritonavir. Nirmatrelvir is a newly approved drug. It is a potent protease inhibitor, targeting a protease, an enzyme that cuts proteins, that is needed by SARS-CoV-2 for viral replication. Nirmatrelvir does this by mimicking protein. The virus protease enzyme is needed to allow the virus to mature inside human cells. It's required for cutting long protein sequences called polypeptides produced by the viral messenger RNA. If the protease is inhibited, a vital step in its replication is blocked, and the viral protein stays as the unprocessed polypeptide. If this process was allowed to take place, like a normal infection, these polypeptides would be processed into lots of smaller proteins that the virus can use to build new virus particles. Nirmatrelvir was developed by modifying another Pfizer drug called lufitrelvir, which hasn't been approved. Lufitrelvir needs to be administered intravenously, meaning it can only be used in a hospital, a bit like remdesivir, meaning it's not particularly useful for early treatment of COVID infection at home. Modification led to nirmatrelvir, which can be taken orally, in a pill. Early studies indicate that it is quite effective in preventing the replication of COVID. Importantly, studies show that it retains its inhibitory ability against major strains like Alpha, Beta, Delta and Omicron. So that's nirmatrelvir. What about ritonavir? If nirmatrelvir is effective on its own, why did Pfizer include ritonavir in the mix too? Ritonavir is a HIV protease inhibitor, approved for clinical use way back in the mid-1990s. It isn't effective at inhibiting COVID, so why is it in there? Ritonavir is a potent inhibitor of an enzyme called P450 in the liver. This enzyme is involved in metabolizing many drugs. This enzyme also metabolizes nirmatrelvir. Therefore, by using ritonavir to inhibit this enzyme, we stop nirmatrelvir from being metabolized by the body. This means we can use lower doses of nirmatrelvir, while still letting it build up in concentration to the point where it becomes effective against the COVID-19 virus, prolonging the action of nirmatrelvir. Indeed, ritonavir has been used as a supportive drug to increase the effectiveness of other medicines. So, altogether, nirmatrelvir is the primary drug effective against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. However, it has a short duration of action and is readily metabolized in the liver. So, ritonavir is used alongside it to prolong its action by inhibiting its metabolism in the liver. Therefore, Paxlovid can be taken just twice daily. How effective is Paxlovid? Paxlovid appears to have high clinical efficacy against the virus and has received emergency approval based on an interim analysis of clinical trial data. Data from Phase 2 and Phase 3 studies, encompassing 1,219 adults, found that those who took Paxlovid within 3 days of COVID symptoms had an 89% lower risk of hospital admission or death when compared to a placebo group. Of those treated within 3 days of symptom onset, 3 out of 389 patients, 0.8% on Paxlovid, were admitted to hospital up to 28 days after treatment initiation, with no deaths. By comparison, 27 out of 385 patients in the placebo group, 7%, were admitted to hospital, with 7 deaths. The difference between these groups was highly statistically significant. Similar reductions were seen in patients treated within 5 days of symptom onset. This clinical trial, which was due to enroll 3,000 planned patients from around the world, has ended early owing to these positive results. What about safety? Interim data from these trials show that reported adverse events were equally common in both Paxlovid and placebo groups, at 19 and 21% respectively, and most of these were mild. Note that an adverse event is anything that happened to the patient and might not be caused by the treatment, so the similar rates between placebo and Paxlovid groups suggests that the treatment was tolerated well. Furthermore, those who received Paxlovid had a significantly lower rate of serious adverse events, at 1.7% versus 6.6% in the placebo group. So, the drug seems relatively safe for 5-day use, as per the interim data. However, there are important safety concerns. Paxlovid is primarily metabolized in the liver. As a result, it's not recommended in patients with severe liver, hepatic, and kidney, renal impairment. Additionally, there are concerns regarding drug-drug interactions. Ritonavir may alter the metabolism of many drugs, even from its first dose. This includes drugs like pain medication, antiarrhythmics, antipsychotics, antibiotics, and many other medications. So, care has to be taken to avoid using Paxlovid alongside other medications dependent on liver enzymes for clearance. What about future research? Severe COVID is more common among older adults and those living with chronic ailments, like cardiovascular diseases. Although drug efficacy is less likely to vary between the various population groups, the safety of such drugs among special population groups is an area of concern. Additionally, there is a further need to understand its efficacy against specific variants or emerging variants. It appears to work for a range of variants, including Alpha, Beta, Delta, and Omicron. However, it may not against future variants. In the future, antiviral resistance and COVID-19 reinfection may emerge as significant problems. There is also an opportunity to study Paxlovid as a prophylaxis to prevent COVID infection in those exposed to the virus in their households, and particularly in high-risk groups or essential occupations like healthcare workers. These prophylaxis studies, which are also taking place with the antiviral molnupiravir, are an important avenue of future research. As the COVID-19 pandemic enters its third year, the emergence of new variants like Omicron and high breakthrough infection rates show that vaccines alone are not enough to overcome the pandemic. Moreover, vaccine hesitancy is making things worse by putting people at unnecessary risk of more severe disease. Antivirals like Paxlovid and molnupiravir may help fill the gap left by vaccines. They might be more readily accepted by those hesitant to take vaccines, and these drugs will help prevent mortality caused by breakthrough infections. Additionally, oral medications have fewer logistical challenges, unlike vaccines that require cold chain logistics. Even worse, most vaccines cannot be stored in commonly available cold chains that store vaccines at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. Oral